This is Tim, and this is book 2 for June. I can't believe June is almost over. I'm already thinking about book 1 for July, and I think I got it. So, we're reading from this book, but particularly from Ta-Nehisi Coates' essay, The Case for Reparations. There are more articles being written about reparations, and I think it's becoming clear that if Black Americans don't get reparations, we're finished. And I don't know what that means for this society, this side of the continent, because the Black American is distinct and has a rich culture, and has a rich history, and has a rich ability, and a very valuable ability, even if we don't use it and we don't recognize it as Black Americans. It's very powerful, and if we can tap into it, we can help turn this thing around. And I'm not sure if you could turn it around without us tapping into it. So let's continue into this. Making the second ghetto. Today, Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the country, a fact that reflects assiduous planning. In the effort to uphold white supremacy at every level down to the neighborhood, Chicago, a city founded by the black fur trader Jean-Baptiste Point de Sable, has long been a pioneer. The efforts began in earnest in 1917 when the Chicago Real Estate Board, horrified by the influx of Southern blacks, lobbied to zone the entire city by race. But after the Supreme Court ruled against explicit racial zoning that year, the city was forced to pursue its agenda by more discreet means. Like the Homeowners Loan Corporation, the Federal Housing Administration initially insisted on restrictive covenants, which helped bar blacks and other ethnic undesirables from receiving federally backed home loans. By the 1940s, Chicago led the nation in the use of these restrictive covenants, and about half of all residential neighborhoods in the city were effectively off limits to blacks. It is common today to become misty-eyed about the old black ghetto, where doctors and lawyers live next door to meat packers and steelworkers, who themselves live next door to prostitutes and the unemployed. This segregationist nostalgia ignores the actual conditions endured by the people living there, vermin and arson for instance, and ignores the fact that the old ghetto was premised on denying black people privileges enjoyed by white Americans. In 1948, when the Supreme Court ruled the restrictive covenants, while permissible, were not enforceable by judicial action, Chicago had other weapons at the ready. The Illinois state legislature had already given Chicago City Council the right to approve, and thus to veto, any public housing in the city's wards. This came in handy in 1949 when a federal housing act sent millions of tax dollars into Chicago and other cities around the country. Beginning in 1950, site selection for public housing proceeded entirely on the grounds of segregation. By the 1960s, the city had created with its vast housing projects what the historian Arnold R. Hirsch calls a second ghetto, one larger than the old Black Belt, but just as impermeable. More than 98% of all the family public housing units built in Chicago between 1950 and the mid-1960s were built in all black neighborhoods. Governmental embrace of segregation was driven by the virtual racism of Chicago's white citizens. White neighborhoods vulnerable to black encroachment formed block associations for the sole purpose of enforcing segregation. They lobbied fellow whites not to sell. They lobbied those blacks who did manage to buy to sell back. In 1949, a group of Inglewood Catholics formed block associations intended to keep up the neighborhood. Translation: keep black people out, and when civic engagement was not enough, when government failed, When private banks could no longer hold the line, Chicago turned to an old tool in the American repertoire: racial violence. The pattern of terrorism is easily discernible, concluded a Chicago civic group in the 1940s. It is at the seams of the black ghetto in all directions. On July 1st and 2nd of 1946, a mob of thousands assembled in Chicago's Park Manor neighborhood, hoping to eject a black doctor who recently moved in. The mob pelted the house with rocks and set the garage on fire. The doctor moved away. In 1947, after a few black veterans moved into the Fernwood section of Chicago, 3 nights of rioting broke out. Gangs of whites yanked blacks off streetcars and beat them. 2 years later, when a union meeting attended by blacks in Inglewood triggered rumors that a home was being sold to niggers, blacks and whites thought to be sympathetic to them were beaten in the street. In 1951, thousands of whites in Cicero, 20 minutes or so west of downtown Chicago, attacked an apartment building that housed a single black family, throwing bricks and firebombs through the windows and setting the apartment on fire. A Cook County grand jury declined to charge the rioters and instead indicted the family's NAACP attorney. The apartment's new white owner and the owner's attorney and rental agent charged them with conspiring to lower property values. 2 years after that, whites picketed and planted explosives in South Deering, about 30 minutes from downtown Chicago, to force blacks out. When terrorism ultimately failed, white homeowners simply fled the neighborhood. The traditional terminology white flight implies a kind of natural expression of preference. In fact, white flight was a triumph of social engineering, orchestrated by shared racist presumptions of America's public and private sectors. For should any non-racist white families decide that integration might not be so bad as a matter of principle or practicality, they still had to contend with the hard facts of American housing policy. When the mid-20th century white homeowner claimed that the presence of Bill and Daisy Myers decreased his home property value, he was not merely engaging in racist dogma, he was accurately observing the impact of federal policy on market prices. Redlining destroyed the possibility of investment wherever black people live. So, there you go. No blacks allowed. And at some point, black people, we're going to have to just be happy enough with ourselves that we can live with each other and not flee each other all the time. That's easier said than done, but we can't make the proper contribution to humanity if we can't be what we are in full and as a group. Until next time, thank you for your support. Take care of your mind, take care of your body, and please be safe.